Hello and welcome to Boxset, Binge, the Bible, the podcast from Seven Vineyard, where we have been listening through the entire Bible in a year. My name is Bern and Leckie, joined by Owen Lynch.
Hi there.
And we have cause to celebrate today because have been means we have just actually finished listening through the whole Bible.
Yeah, that's brilliant. No, really good. Really, really good. And really, like, in some ways, mixed emotions as well, because really enjoyed it. So almost, I'm not ready to go back to the start and start again, but it was so good.
Is there one thing maybe that you could identify that you've sort of grasped from the year, something that's maybe changed your perspective or challenged you or you've really enjoyed the most, something you've got from it?
Yeah, I think what I've been surprised by is that, if you like, is the homogeneity of it, the sense that it's so interlinked, it's so knitted together. And much of it appears to have been written in a period of time, you know, has surprised me and reminded me that the Bible, whilst is an ancient tradition that goes back thousands of years, the reality is that, you know, what we have in our hands was put together in a smaller window about a long period of time. But yeah, that's kind of really the way in which even today, listening to Revelation, how John draws so deeply on Ezekiel, Daniel, and some of the Jeremiah's and Isaiah's prophecies. That connection there, and many others. I think I've been surprised by that and delighted by that in some ways.
I get that. Me too. I think the process of going through this fast enough to be able to get an overview, to be able to see how it all links together, means for me that I being able to see the links between the things that were being written about maybe hundreds of years before other things were being considered and written about. There's clearly people who've gone on a great big walk theologically and practically and technologically and everything else. So much has changed since the beginning of putting the Bible down to the end. And yet, look at all these themes that keep coming up. Look at all this consistency that keeps emerging. Maybe one theme above all, God's desire to be with people and to lead in a good and loving and fruitful way, for us to be the image bearers that's talked about in Genesis chapter 1, but to be able to put that into practice. So it's not just something about who we are, but it's about things that we feel like doing as well, not just individually, but that things we can do together. So we're still looking forward right now to this fulfillment of life on earth looking the way we think it ought to look. And we're some distance away from that. But the closest we get to the end of time at the recording of the Bible as we have it is this book here. It's Revelation. And I think it's a kind of intriguing book, maybe the most intriguing book in the Bible. It's maybe a bit of a rock and roll ending. It's dramatic. It's not clear, I think, exactly how to interpret it all. But we know those themes. I think we can sense that those themes are there. This theme of sort of fulfillment of the kingdom, the theme of God being able to deliver what He's always promised people in different ways at different times. But how is that all going to get done? You know, what do these bits and bobs in Revelation actually mean? Who are they for? What are we supposed to do about them? Those are some interesting little questions that we'll hope to wrap up all neatly in the next half an hour or so.
You know that's not going to happen, right?
So, yes. So, Owen, what do you think? What's your answer?
Yeah, what is my answer? Well, yeah, I mean, do you know what? I do think I was kind of struck by a kind of two-sentence summary, if you like, that is just one person's perspective. The Revelation reveals that there is a pattern in history that every human kingdom becomes like Babylon, whatever power base that is. And Babylon, of course, for Israelites was like the biggest enemy. They were the ones that destroyed Jerusalem and the temple and carried everyone off into exile. If you've not been listening these last few weeks, you'll know what I mean by that. Every human kingdom becomes like Babylon in the sense that they overstretch themselves and they impose their economic and military systems in such a way as to cause people to kind of imprisoned in them. And then the second thing I think Revelation reveals to us is the promise that Jesus won't let every Babylon run amok unchecked. And I think for me, those two sentences kind of capture what John is trying to say here. So we could dig deeper into that, but that for me is reassuring. I tell you why it's reassuring to me, because we live in a world, don't we, where there's lots of evil. And I don't know about you, but I know that we all see the world from our own perspective, so I have to be careful what I say here. But where I see evil, I'm really happy when I see it defeated. And again, I have to be careful how I say this, because I'm just seeing this from my perspective. I live in the United Kingdom, reading the British press, so I have to recognise that. But when I saw that President Assad, Bashar al-Assad of Syria, had been run out of his own country, and now we're seeing some of the terrible things that have happened whilst he was the president of that country, I'm really happy that he's now not the president of that country. That makes me glad. For me, that looks like evil has been overcome and put back in its box. And there's other examples of that, okay, which kind of give me hope that other people who I think are evil might be overcome as well. I'm sure if you've lived in different periods of time, you'll have different perspectives on these things. But yeah, that's reassuring to me. But it's not always the case.
Well, it's an interesting example as well, because we don't know what's going to happen next.
No, exactly.
We don't know whether the power that comes in next will be as good or better or worse. And it does remind me of times in history. I think you can think of lots of times, like when the Berlin Wall came down, if you can remember that, and all the optimism, which was well founded for many people getting freedom, but would, years later, who imagined that we'd be in the situation where we're in now, where we're literally, fighting Russia on various fronts in various ways, and worrying the outcome of that struggle.
Exactly.
And how is good? How is good personified in that struggle?
Yeah.
Is that really that simple?
Yeah.
Do we have to learn from history that there's that it's a complicated issue?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Ben. And I think that's what John is getting at here, because they're all living in a very kind of difficult period as well, aren't they, under the domination of Rome? And actually, I think John is pointing out exactly what you just said there, that this is really complicated and difficult.
So let's try and understand it through the lens, if we can, of how the people at the time would have grasped it. What does it say? What does it mean? What does it mean to them is a really good starting point before we get to what does it mean to us. So, chapter 1, the revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. That's intriguing. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who testifies to everything he saw, that is, the word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. So this is all coming through John. We think the same John who wrote the gospel and the letters. Who is it to? It's to 7 churches in the province of Asia. Some of those churches we've heard of, like the Ephesians. Some of them we haven't heard of. They don't get mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. But I guess we assume that the churches had common issues. So what were their issues? As far as I can see, the issues that the churches were facing, the things that made them sort of still know that they were in the middle of something that wasn't yet resolved, was that they were part of a growing revolutionary movement that proclaimed Christ as king. So it was a kingdom they were looking forward to. And as a king, he would be opposed by other kings, perhaps, if you can only have one ruling power in one place. And we saw opposition to Jesus from the Jewish authorities. We see it from the Roman Empire especially. They saw Christians as a Jewish sect. They reacted strongly against Judaism then, and they blamed Christians. Nero blamed Christians for many of Rome's problems, including the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. A historian at the time wrote that this is when Christians started getting arrested and tortured and executed in horrific ways, like being burned alive. So this is what Christians were facing at the time of getting that this revelation. Was that exactly then? Or maybe, I think most people a century later thought it was a few decades after that. Sometime between about 65 and 95 AD. And in the middle of this actual persecution, they're trying to work out what their hope is. They're really hoping that Jesus is coming back really soon. We've seen from Paul's letters that maybe Paul thought this was going to happen right now. And so don't do anything big. They just get ready for this is the most important thing. And then as their lives went on, people realized actually God was building something, at least in the meantime. His kingdom was coming through the lives they were living there and then. So what did that mean? What kind of life should they be expecting? Against all this opposition, could they be people who are marked out by spiritual fruit? Could they be growing in love and joy and peace? How do you do that when that's not easy? And how did they sort of defend against all this false teaching as well that was going on? All the people saying that Christians had to obey the Jewish law, or people saying, oh, you could just do whatever you like because you're saved by Jesus, so nothing matters anymore. Or how about just live like a pagan and join in all the sort of pagan sacrifices and idol worship and all that sort of thing. You just have to sort of believe in your head in Jesus, and that's all that matters. Some people taught that physical things were all bad, and so you should sort of discipline yourself and just look forward to heaven and not think about life on earth at all. And other people thought, well, this is all very complicated. There's some secret extra, as well as what Jesus has revealed to everybody. There's some secret extra knowledge that, by the way, I can tell you because I've received it. And that sort of thought was called Gnosticism. You have to know something extra to be able to really know what's God's going on. These are all issues that are being written about in the letters. These are all issues that we also know about from other historians. So I think we've got a good picture here as we go into looking at what Jesus is saying. Jesus gets notes. The churches get notes from Jesus about how it's going. That's brilliant. And Jesus seems to refer to a lot of these things, doesn't he? So what are we taking from what Jesus is saying to the churches?
I think you're right. I think Jesus, speaking through John, appears to address the apathy, the influence, and the immorality in some of those communities. But also, he seems to be talking to communities that are suffering violence, intimidation, and persecution. And it appears, rather in a rather downhearted way, that in some ways, Jesus is one of the things that are only going to get worse. Which sounds pretty awful. Things must have been really bad for many of these communities at that time. What do you think, Ben? What insight do you have on those and what was happening at that time?
Well, there was a lot of persecution for sure. There were external pressures, but people were also facing this. Is I think comes up from the teaching and the encouragement about false teachings and dealing with things that Jesus didn't like that were going on within the churches. This isn't just Jesus saying, "Hi guys, I know you're having a hard time, so do your best." No, Jesus is coming along, actually getting involved with the internal battle as well. I think Jesus is aware of something which hasn't really changed since then, and even in our relatively comfy society, I recognise. That we can be materially comfortable but still struggling to make good choices, still struggling to do things consistently well, still struggling to love consistently, and so that's part of my lifelong journey of following Jesus and wanting more of God's love to flow through me and come out in my family and in our community and everywhere else where we are. That's how we want to see our lives develop, but we're not there yet. One thing I noticed that Jesus says, even to the best sounding of these churches, the word repent comes up quite a lot, and that repent in the Greek is metanoia, means change your mind. In some parts of Christian history, as we talked about before, the word repent has been reduced to something much smaller than that, just to say sorry for sins, and perhaps even just to say sorry at a particular point of conversion to Christianity. But the ongoing change of mind we saw Paul write about in Romans is a lifelong process. That seems to be what the disciples were engaging with, and to me that seems to be what Jesus is saying here to everybody. Everyone's interested in following and seeing the kingdom of God come. There's an ongoing process of repenting and changing and developing that's part of that. This verse in chapter 3 that often gets pointed to when people go and evangelize and want to convert people to Christianity. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. This is true. You could read it in that context. But the slightly broader context is, those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. So be earnest and repent. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me. I think this is a really crucial couple of verses to help us interpret all of the rest, because the context then isn't, hey, church, form a nice little bubble and protect yourself against the evil world, and you're all fine, just as you are, as much as it is, hey, church, what I'm doing with you is an ongoing process, including ongoing discipline, ongoing repenting, ongoing growth, ongoing good things that are coming from that process. And Jesus is always here, and he's always wanting to sit and eat with us. And don't you get really good things when you sit and eat with someone? It's not like someone's just sort of yakking at you and telling you what to do. You're sitting and eating, and you're sharing, and this is the life I think Jesus wants everyone to keep coming back to, keep having in mind, even in the difficult times, which unimaginably difficult and bad from our point of view, the things that Christians were going through, but also things that we can relate to as well in terms of our internal discussions and things that we want to get worked out in our own lives.
You make a good point about the word metanoia, Bern. That you talk about it, changing your mind. In other words, having an open mind, and reflecting the realities that few of us hold on to the same idea for the whole of our lives, right? And there are a few ideas that we hold on to for the whole of our lives. We are, as we grow and change, as we experience life, and so our thinking adapts and changes according to our experiences, right?
Absolutely.
That's a great use of that word metanoia, isn't it? Because that does stand sometimes in contrast with a religious frame of mind that is not willing to think for themselves and not willing to engage with debate and discussion in order to advance one's thinking, right?
Yeah, and I think keeping an open mind and knowing that we've always got something to learn, especially from Jesus, who wants to sit and eat with us and share and help us learn over dinner.
Right.
I'd love that. Yes, please. That's difficult to do if we say we've got nothing to learn. Now, I'm looking at the rest of Revelation then, and all these sort of prophecies, which there are various views about what they mean. And I guess you listening, you probably have a view about what some of it means and what you think it can't mean or whatever. I've got some views. We've both looked around to see like some of the breadth of what people say. And the thing that struck me is that there's such a breadth into how people interpret this big bulk of Revelation, that it would kind of be madness to just dig into one particular interpretation of, oh, that was that person, or that was that particular time, or that was that thing. If there's anything else that God was meaning to communicate it through to the church over history, which seems to be where we are. Some of the views that I think we could look at it in terms of it's a prophetic vision, which definitely seems to be. Is it a reflection just on the events of the time, the things that Christians were going through, but that's it? Some people think that would want to focus on that. Some people focus it on predictions of future events, and look at our world and go, well, these haven't all happened yet. So, but thankfully this gives us a picture of, it's like a camera of what's going to happen. Again, we talked about the Left Behind books recently. If you want that fleshed out in a novel that's quite fun to read, Left Behind is a good series for that. If you want to think that this is this was all meant as a camera on the future, but then other people look at it much more sort of metaphorically and say, well, it's a call to worship, it's a call to grow spiritually, it's a critique of empire in general and power structures in general. All of these things might have some validity, The view that kind of sways me the most, where I think is a good place to start from, I know we've talked about this in terms of like recognizing it in other bits of the Bible as well, is that it's a kind of literature that has a genre name. It's called apocalyptic literature. And there's other stuff in our culture. We have apocalyptic literature, mainly called sci-fi, and things like the Terminator. That's a good apocalyptic story. Covers the battle between good and evil, and life versus machines, and creators versus creation, and wisdom versus folly. All these sort of things, like the same sort of themes we're dealing with here. They all come up in Terminator. Revelation is the 2,000 years before that version of apocalyptic. And it links to lots of other sorts of prophetic and biblical work as well, doesn't it? What similarities did you see, Owen, in between Revelation and what else is in the Bible and in the culture?
Yeah, I think John is he's clearly immersed in many books that we've been listening to, like Ezekiel and Daniel and Jeremiah and Isaiah. He seems to really like all those books because he draws a lot on imagery that we see in there, and I find it absolutely fascinating. I mean, man, this boy knew his stuff. It's just, really incredible the way in which he really synthesizes many of the imagery, the images that we see spoken about by Ezekiel, Daniel, and Isaiah and Jeremiah about what was then Babylon. But he uses that imagery to talk about Rome. But that doesn't mean that it's just about Rome or it's just about Babylon. I think you're right. I think it's. I think there's. I think he's talking about the principle that the empire destroys, and we could see that even in our more modern recent history. Let's think of the British Empire or the French Empire and so forth. When these military and economic systems get into full flow, whether it's Babylon or Rome or whatever it is, they do destroy and they do divide, and they do cause great deal of inequality. And I think he's really conscious of that, and I think he's conscious that Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, they were all really concerned about that as well, and they reflected God's heart, which is what he is reflecting here. So I think that when we look at the symbolism that John employs, much of it we'll see repeated in other books that we've been listening to, and it'll feel familiar. And also, I don't know if you noticed this, but some of the imagery, thinking of the bowls, it's drawn straight from imagery in Exodus. The plagues that were sent upon Pharaoh. Some of the imagery we listened to in Exodus right back at the beginning of the year. Same with the trumpets. What he's doing here is he's really taking imagery that his listeners would have been very familiar with. I mean, particularly the Jewish listeners, they would have really understood this, and they would have understood what he was alluding to. So it wouldn't have been as, if it feels a little bit kind of abstract to us, it wouldn't have been to his listeners. They would have understood exactly what he was trying to say, whether it's the seals, the trumpets, or the blasts.
Each one of those images connects with a story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As whether it's the trumpets that were blown before the fall of the walls of Jericho, maybe.
Yeah.
Whether it's the heavenly throne room that was first written about maybe in Job, but then later seen by Ezekiel,
Zechariah,
and all these images that condense and refer to a huge system of trying to put into some sort of understandable way the workings of the kingdom of heaven. Basically is what we're talking about here. Another thing that really strikes me is the use of numbers. John is very, very methodical and particular about his use of particular numbers. He loves the numbers 6 and 7. 7 was seen as a divine number. The number of days that are described, the number of periods of time described at the beginning of Genesis and creation. The 6 was also regarded as a very human number, perhaps the pinnacle of human effort and achievement. 666. You had a thought, what could 666 refer to?
Yeah, so John spoke in Hebrew and Greek, and in Hebrew, letters were also numbers. And so if you spell the Greek words Nero, Caesar, and the beast in Hebrew, each one amounts to 666. And so what John is saying is that when nations like Rome, of which Nero was and Caesar were emblematic, when these empires exalt their own power and economic security, they become like beasts. So, where in the same way that Babylon was the beast in Daniel's day, and we see that, him describing him as a beast, then so in John's day, Rome was the beast. But yeah, that's the origin of that story. And there's also quite an interesting reference as well here where this mark of the beast was on the forehead and the hand. And there's an interesting parallel here, which is a direct parallel. I think the scholars would agree on this, that in Deuteronomy 6, there's a prayer of allegiance of the Israelites to Yahweh. And this prayer, where was it written? On their forehead and on their hand, as symbols of devotion, that all their thoughts and their actions would be devoted to Yahweh. So in a sense, John is taking that very, very familiar to them, to the Jews, this cultural icon, this cultural symbol of the Shema, the prayer of Deuteronomy 6, and saying it's the opposite of that, but it's the same. It's the same. So it's like devotion to the system, devotion to this military economic system that at that time was called Rome. I think there's a sense there that the mark of the beast was your sense of devotion in your thoughts and in your actions to that system.
Interesting. I think it's worth remembering as well that in all ancient cultures, pretty much every culture that we know of, up until kind of, at least in Europe, perhaps in the Middle Ages, all of them didn't really have the separation between the spiritual and the physical that we have had since deciding, on the Enlightenment to pursue the scientific method and to try and codify what we know about physical things and keep that separate from spiritual and religious concerns in some ways. Everyone in this culture would have seen spiritual and physical as all part of the same thing. So when you were talking about spiritual powers and human powers, no one could clearly see a distinction, a gap between them that you could say, oh yes, he did that. Because, sometimes it's described in terms of, Satan entered in here and made someone do something, but the real, there's no real evidence that people saw having a sort of autonomy physically that was distinct and completely different from a spiritual world. So when we're seeing these kind of spiritual metaphors and these spiritual battles being described, it's just as legitimate to see them as battles between earthly empires and earthly rulers and people using their powers to decide and what to do with that power as having spiritual links as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it seems odd. To us. It seems like it's all happening on another plane of existence, as far as from our point of view. But from their point of view, in the first century, this was all very relevant to a consideration of what things would mean on Earth. Which then means, how do you interpret? Is it wise to interpret literally things like the measurements of the city? That was being promised. If you look at the size of the city that God was going to build, it was literally like the size of Europe, and cubic as well. So it was as high as it was wide. So I worked out that if it's literally as described, then it's about 3 times the height of the orbit of the International Space Station.
That's quite high.
Yeah, go well into space. Be quite thin air up there. But what do we take from that? Are we looking for? Do we have to see that happen, like physically, like literally, or do we take something else, that it is a promise of something magnificent that God is doing and in process of doing, that we can look forward to more than we've seen so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some interesting things that stand out to me in this book that that I just wanted to mention a couple of things, just because I think they're just fun tidbits. We often
Please do.
we use that word Armageddon to kind of like a total war of annihilation. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Armageddon, but where aliens invade the Earth. It's inspiring. It's about how humanity, repels the evil aliens and so forth. But Armageddon is actually a place, Armageddon, which is a plain where most of Israel's historically battles were fought against invaders that wanted to overrun them, and we're talking back when they settled in the land, and that would have been a physical place they would have known, John describes a war at this place called Armageddon. And John appears to be using Ezekiel's imagery of Yahweh's battle with Gog, which was a symbol of the rebellious nations, if you can cast your mind back to our listening of Ezekiel. What I find interesting, though, is that Armageddon, like, imagery in my mind is like a complete bloodbath. Okay, it's kind of like both sides take huge losses, and it's just horrific. But actually, what we see in chapters 19-20 is that Armageddon will not be a bloodbath, John says. Instead of everyone's blood being spilt, Jesus' blood is spilt instead. And indeed, when we think about what's happening here, we are recognizing that the response of Jesus to all of this evil in the world, how he's going to conquer it, is not by matching evil or military power with military power. What we see is Jesus conquering through love and sacrifice, his own love and his own sacrifice, and that's a constant theme throughout John. And perhaps is an indicator that this person really did know Jesus very well. Maybe this was the John that Jesus, the disciple that Jesus loved, as you alluded to earlier on, Bern. But clearly, for John, the way Jesus conquers, the way Jesus overcomes, is through love and through sacrifice. And that is a theme that really came through to me as I was listening towards the end of this book of Revelation. And did you notice that, Ben?
Yeah, and I think it's worth reminding ourselves here as well how countercultural that would have been at the time. We've had, for better or worse, 1,500 plus years of what we'd call Christendom. A time when actually, yes, the Roman Empire was overcome. It was replaced with something that looked like Christianity, and then Christianity, in that position of power, had questions to answer about how to use that power. We can look back and we can see times when it's been misused, but we can also look back and see that this idea that God could use people's weaknesses and be glorified in weakness rather than strength, in love rather than just selfish self-expression. All these things that have come through the witness of Christ and the first followers of Christ, I think we almost take for granted that these are good things. These are morally good things in our culture, even if we can't always live up to them. In Roman culture, it was very different. There were Roman philosophers and historians, we can read people like Celsius, who railed against this idea of a kingdom, a supposed kingdom, which was really just a movement of the weak. It was only attracting the misfits and the strays and women, and the disabled and all the sorts of people that were systematically suppressed in Rome in their struggle to move forwards through strength. That's what they valued. They valued strength. They valued people who could push the Pax Romana, the idea of having peace because we're going to enforce it and because you're going to do what we tell you to do. That was their idea. They didn't get how that could be displaced by a kingdom based on someone who was crucified, someone who died. They didn't get that. They didn't get how God could use that and overcome everything, overcome the worst of what Romans could throw at anybody by raising Jesus from the dead, by bringing life where there was only death. And we're going back to imagery that we've also seen from the prophets now as well. That life coming into dry bones. This is what God's been wanting to do for us all along. But it requires us, I think, to recognise his kingdom rather than our own. Because when we try and do it our own way, how can we do that? We need to rely on God, and I think that is the essence of what John's talking about here. This conflict between the way we would do things if we just worked it out for ourselves without any help from God, and the way we can do things when we're empowered by God and we know how much we're loved by God and we know how much God can help us to love others. That conflict is one that God wins. Love wins. His love wins. Good wins. Creation, his creation, his creativity wins against anything that says no. That's a good thing. We should just do it my way instead. God's going to win all those battles. I love that.
And in the big picture of history, it is a long game, because obviously that, it didn't look like they were winning at this time, but John's encouragement to them is love wins, that righteousness wins, that goodness wins, that God wins. And I think there's two ways that I kind of can think about this. One is in the big picture of things, like eventually love won in terms of the brutality, if you like, of the Roman Empire. But at the same time, we see in today's current events around the world that eventually we believe love wins. We believe that goodness and righteousness win. And those things are like a big picture thing. It might not seem like they're winning, might seem that there's loads of setbacks along the way. But where I can see it at work would be in my own life, where I recognise that rather than have an argument with someone, try and see things from their perspective would be a great place to try and bring resolution. Rather than be unkind and harsh, be gentle and kind. Those are ways. It might cost me to do that, but those are ways in which we bring resolution and harmony and peace and harmony in our lives. And I think that's what Revelation 22 is painting a picture of, is that love and sacrifice lead to peace and harmony, and joy and hope and all those wonderful things that I continue to refer to at Galatians 5. Paul refers to, that's a society, that's a family, that's a community I want to live in, where those things are present. But it takes love and sacrifice. It takes sacrifice. It is not always easy to do those things. And even today, I can think of times when I've not been like that, and it would have cost me to be like that. But therefore, I didn't want to pay that cost, so I wasn't like that. See? So I think that I think we can view it in a big picture like John was, but we can also view it very much on a personal level, on a day-to-day basis. And for me, that's just an amazing place for the Bible to finish, really. I kind of what a great way to finish the Bible, to say that love and sacrifice wins. I just think it's really profound.
It is, isn't it? And to see the mixture of this working on a big picture, whole of history thing, but also feel its significance in our own lives as well. John's end of the world theme feels very far off and end of the worldy, almost a bit sci-fi, almost a bit Terminator, almost a bit kind of like, well, I don't really want this to be real. But if I look back at my own life, about how many times I've needed to face the end of a world, in order to go on to a new part of life. There was the end of my world when I was single, when we got married. I don't regret that. That was great. But it was the end of one world and the beginning of another. There was the end of the world where together we didn't have a child, and the beginning of the world of being parents. That is a huge change. If you've experienced that, If you haven't yet experienced that, maybe you're putting it off because you can't see how your world's going to end and how you could step into this other different world. I think sometimes it's easy to try and think of spiritual growth and what God wants to do with us as a very sort of nice, gentle, gradual process, which we'd like it to be. But I think what John's writing about and hinting about, and this is a very, big picture view of a big picture book, but beyond the specifics of what was going on with the church, I think it's legitimate to see it like a picture of how growth happens in general. Not always steady, not always pain-free, often in big jumps, paradigm shifts, things that we have to accept personally if we're going to live in a new world, like being a dad before you weren't a dad. That's one example. But also as a church, I think sometimes the church, we're going to have to take on ideas based on what we are learning that God is doing in the world. Are people as simple as we thought when we 50 years ago? No, because we found out a lot about how the brain works and how body chemistry works and how lots of things work. A lot of these feel like challenging ideas. A lot of these might make us go back and want to see the Bible as a source of proof texts for just agreeing with what we already thought. But that would be silly, because as we see when we listen through the Bible the whole way through, God's journey with people is a journey of change. It's a journey of rethinking. It's a journey of renewal. It's a journey of growth, which isn't always easy, but my goodness, I really, really want more of it. And that's hopefully how God has equipped us to end 2024 and begin 2025 with open minds. And I'm wondering what he's going to show us next.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great place to draw our Boxset Binge the Bible series to an end. Yeah, it's just been brilliant to share this journey with you. If you've been listening along the way, maybe you just caught some of it, or you've been listening all the way. We're so grateful that you've taken the time to join us in this journey, and we hope that you've got something out of it like we have too.
Yeah, it's been really, really amazing to go through this series. Now, what do we do next is a good question. You may want to rinse and repeat. You may want to go and have another go through listening through the Bible next year. I tend to find myself, I like doing this every couple of years or so, to be honest. Probably next year, I think I'm going to dig into some details a bit more than I've had time for. I'm going to pursue some themes. I've certainly felt inspired to write about certain things as well. So I'm going to write a bit about what I've learned from this process and where I think God's been showing us things over a bigger time scale as well. Look out for a thing called the God of Rainbows, about how amazing God is and how there's more to what God is doing and wants from us and can give to us than we have currently got our heads around.
Brilliant. So loads to look forward to, and we wish you a very happy new year, and we look forward to joining with you again sometime in the future. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye.